I'm gonna get out
Well, first of all, I just want to say thanks for having me. I guess Fred, who accepted my invitation or asking if I could come and hang out with you. Like I said earlier, my name's Joey Molloy, and I've been in youth ministry since the early 90s, and spent some time at my home church in Osgood, which is just south of Ottawa. And then I spent some time up in Sault Ste. Marie, just around the turn of the century. And that makes you sound really old, eh? And then in 2002, we moved back to Ottawa, and I've been working at the Metropolitan Bible Church since then, with junior high and high school ministry predominantly. Recently, I've taken the young adults, supervising that ministry a little bit more as well. But here's the thing that I guess ties into why I'm even here today is ever since I started to think about youth ministry. Oh, and I should say the Met's an AGC church, Associate Gospel Church, and that's kind of between that and Fellowship Baptist churches. That's where I've been working out of. But the thing that's been a sort of a core belief for me in ministry is that I love denominations. I love denominational distinctives. I love the different flavors of how we worship God and think about Him. And I love how that just brings, I think, a great deal of flavor to the greater body. But I do have a really strong belief that old phrase, bloom where you're planted kind of deal. And we're up in Sault Ste. Marie, which is a city about the same size as Kingston, actually, but we're a little bit further isolated from things than you guys are here. We just realized fairly early on that we actually need each other. And so we got together with our brethren friends and our Baptist friends and our Pentecostal friends, and we all just kind of hung out and prayed together and tried to do some stuff together. Some was successful, I suppose, some maybe not, but we just tried. And in doing that, we gained some friendships that I still hold to even all these years later. And so I've just always been a believer that the local expression of the body of Christ needs to work together and support each other. And I really enjoyed just listening to you guys sharing some requests and praying and caring for each one as you're going through different things. So I guess all that to say is I'm a big believer that a healthy youth network breeds healthy youth ministries, which breeds students who are actually going to follow Christ and then in turn marry people who are following Christ and have children who are following Christ, and so on and so on and so on. And so I just would encourage and endorse the idea of getting together and praying for each other and encouraging each other and advocating for each other in so many ways. So anyway, about 5 or 6 years ago, Dale Winder, who runs the Canadian Youth Network and who I bring greetings on behalf of, asked me about moving to Toronto and working with them there, and I just didn't feel like God was moving us from where we're at. I still don't think that. So that's been a conversation for 5 or 6 years, and last winter we talked more about sort of a different idea, and the concept is basically that if the Canadian Youth Network exists to see healthy youth networks, which it does, across Canada, then would it make more sense to have people working, part-time in different regions of the country to help encourage youth networks? And so long story short, that conversation came about this idea of what would it look like if I spent a few hours a week just trying to help networks. Kind of, for now, it's kind of like between Belleville and Montreal, sort of different areas. So I've been starting that. It's kind of been sort of a slow start in a sense, but trying to get in touch with different people like Fred, who I think is your leader, fearless leader, and just seeing what's going on. It's been neat to travel around a little bit, spend some time in Montreal, and there's about 4 or 5 different networks that I've been connecting with and helping with. So that's kind of what I'm doing, just sort of as in my spare time kind of deal, because I am full time at the Met, and I obviously take that fairly really seriously. And so I'm here to just say thanks for valuing networking, and thanks for being in each other's lives and getting to know each other. And I think you've got a warm group here is what I'm sensing, if you are too. And so just keep going with that, and as the year gets busier, value this time and see it as integral to health in youth ministry. I should say also I am married. Sam is my oldest son, and I have another son who's in grade 12, and I have a daughter who's in junior kindergarten. And so we have a busy enough life. My wife works as a musician in SUNY Potsdam in upper state New York, and she's a concert pianist and does that kind of stuff, so she's got her thing going on. And so we've got a lot going on, but it's kind of an interesting life. About 5 or 6 years ago, we got involved with, I forget who was saying Children's Aid, there was a reference somewhere.
Jim,
yeah. We got involved with Children's Aid fostering and so on. That led to adopting our daughter, and we just love her to death. And she's a lot of fun. But so all that to say, and I'm encouraged that around this circle, there's people that are either raising teenagers or who have raised teenagers, and are as parents. And I guess we're all sort of I suppose, as youth pastors and youth leaders. But as someone who's in the process of trying to raise a couple of teenagers and is hoping to be alive when my daughter is old enough to be a teenager, being an old dad now, and it's a different youth ministry when you're a parent to teenagers. And Fred, please direct me if I'm not saying what, because we talked about a lot that day, but I'm trying to pick what you wanted me to talk about. Hopefully I'll get there. When you're interacting with parents, I think there's a couple things we need to really understand. Apart from God, of course, no one will love our students more than their parents. In most cases, I'm talking generally healthy, and even in unhealthy homes, quite frankly, dysfunctional homes, parents still have this dysfunctional love for their children. And I think if we start from that, then we'll understand that parents aren't the enemy, even though they present that way a lot of times. And so I just want to throw that out to start, because the stuff that follows might challenge that thesis. But just an understanding that nobody loves our youth ministry students more than their parents do, including us. And so if we can keep that in our minds, I think it'll help us as we interact with them and see the value of interacting with them and being very intentional with them. At the same time, parents are called to love their children in a way that is not always pizza and late nights and fun and challenging messages from the Word. It's often about discipline and nagging and what are some other negative things that I use? But really trying to direct and bring up. So it's a different type of relationship. So it only stands to reason that there may be a little insecurity coming from parents to the youth leader, because they're at home trying to really raise this kid the way that they think God wants them to, whatever that is. And then they've got the cool youth leader who's off, putting all these visions of what God has for your life and all this and all this fun and challenging and so on and so forth. And so I think there's a natural, and Satan loves to play on this, but I think there's a natural tension that is sometimes there between the church, if you will, or the youth pastor and the parent. I'm going through a season. I'm just about out of it because my younger son's in grade 12 and he'll be graduating.
I'm going to go into it in here.
Yeah.
6 years.
Then I'll have a bit of a break. But it's been since Sam's been in grade 6, which is about 6 or 8 years now, where I've had a student, my own children, in the ministry. And I've counted the parents as peers, because it's basically all of us kind of with our own kids going through. And so I'm actually looking forward to sort of resetting and being with parents and not having a, I call it being more objective once my boys are out. So when I started at the Met in '02, not unlike what you were sharing, you have some ideas, and when you start a new position, just being a new person is change enough, right, for everything. And I fully appreciate that just showing up and being there is enough of a shake up for a lot of people. And that's what I experienced a little bit as well. A little bit of a history lesson is youth ministry really only became youth ministry in the early 90s. Before that, it was youth group. And I mean, you can track youth ministry in North America back to the 40s when Billy Graham and some of his contemporaries really got serious about reaching out to that age group. And truthfully, even before that, it was only about 20, 30 years before that our society even acknowledged adolescence as a stage of life. It used to be as soon as you're old enough to work, you go work, right? And so with this development, both societal and within the church, we started to identify that there are students and that they have uniquenesses to them just in their own development. And so as the 40s moved into the 60s and students realized that they actually had a voice and could speak for themselves, and this whole movement that was afoot in the 70s came about, the church began to realize that they can't just assume that they'll follow, but they have to actually be intentional in reaching out to them. So how do we do that? And the strategy really from about mid-70s to about early 90s was this strategy of let's just entertain them, let's just build a relationship with them, let's just feed them, and then the pastor can do the work of teaching them. And that's why it was called youth group, right? Is you get together and you play games, and not that there was anything wrong with that in the time, and not that there's anything wrong with games, period, but the role of the youth leader was seen as someone who got the group together and then got them in the pews so that the pastor could teach them, right? And it was a reasonably effective strategy. But then as things developed, and when I went to school out at Briarcrest in the late 80s and early 90s, I sat under a guy by the name of Marv Penner, and who's still, I think in his 60s now, and still kind of cruises around and trains people in youth ministry, and trains parents on how to be better, and all that. And he put it in my head and in my heart and in a bunch of others that you could actually train to be a youth minister, a youth pastor, and actually take the word and directly teach students, and not just be someone who corrals the cats and gets them into the church for the pastor to do that job, right? And so it created this new way of doing youth ministry where it was actually either delegated or we kind of took it upon ourselves to disciple students, which of course today in 2016 sounds so, well, of course, that's what we're all about, discipling students. But then it was, well, no, we're actually having Bible studies with them. We're not just playing games and getting them to the right place. All that to say, a generation later, in 2002 to 05, and even there's a bit of a remnants to it now, is that there's parents, when they hear what you're doing and challenging your students towards godliness and so on, and really just teaching them the word and trying to disciple them, there's a resistance to that in my opinion, for two reasons, and you guys might be able to come up with more. But one is that students, on the surface at least, tend to give a bit of a resistance to their parents about anything that's going on. And it creates an insecurity with their parents when a student comes home from church and says, oh, they're just a bunch of cliques. And there's just this insecurity a parent has because they desperately want their kid at church because somehow that will help them. And so it's understandable that way. But at the same time, it's parents, a lot of our parents, self-included, went to a youth group, not a youth ministry. And so when I think of, I'm 48, full disclosure, when I went to youth group at a church, I went where my youth leader played hockey with me, and we went bowling. and he's taught me Sunday school, which was really in preparation for church, right? That was kind of the deal. And so a lot of the parents who grew up in the church that we're dealing with, their concept of youth, whatever you do with youth, is youth group, not youth ministry. And so when they have a kid come home from youth ministry for the first time going, oh, it was a Bible study, and I don't, this kind of deal, there's this sense of, wait a minute, this is supposed to be the funnest thing they ever do so that they want to stay in the church and, learn how to. Does that make sense a little bit? And so that's a lot of this that I faced when I first started in Sault Ste. Marie too, but more so when I arrived back in Ottawa. It's just this tension, not with the students, because quite frankly, we know that students actually want to be challenged with the word, and they want to be shown that there's something so much more than this world. And they are just wired at their age and stage of life to be countercultural anyway. And so when they see something that's a little bit, rebellious, if you will, towards the world, they're attracted to that. And then, of course, when they encounter the supernatural God and are taught from the supernatural word, that just changes. And that's why it's so exciting. That's why we all do it, right? But for parents, that insecurity of if my son or daughter just doesn't like something, and all of a sudden is like, my world's falling apart here because I desperately want them to grow up in the church. Versus this idea, this concept that they have that youth group should be youth group. And I think that is really what causes a lot of the tension that we have with parents. And I think if we can appreciate that, even if we disagree maybe with parts of it, if we can appreciate that, it'll help us in our interaction with parents. And I think it'll help us partner with them to help them raise the students. It really, Scripture has called them to raise, not us anyway, right? And I think they might feel like we want to support them as opposed to just do our own thing and make sure you drop them off on time and that your check cashes for the retreat and so on. Right? And so anyway, is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah,
of, Fred?
absolutely.
I wanted to.
And just to say, I went up